Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. They have been called the king of fish. Historic runs were described as so prolific, there were almost enough salmon to walk across a river without getting your feet wet. They were the primary source of nutrition for native peoples. Although these majestic fish repeatedly endured the worst of natural disasters in this region, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, glaciation, and megafloods, just 1 century of Western civilization has now left their survival in doubt. In the 1950s, the Columbia Snake River Basin was the most prolific salmon habitat in the world. 30,000 returned to Idaho's Redfish Lake alone. But in 1992, only 1 completed the journey, a solitary sockeye salmon nicknamed Lonesome Larry. The most storied salmon fishery was at Celilo Falls on the Columbia, with a history of more than 10,000 years. But when the Dalles Dam began operation in 1957, the falls were submerged, disappeared in just hours, as did the fishery and native villages. Hydropower is one of the 5 H's threatening salmon survival, as described by scientist David Montgomery. The others, habitat, harvest, hatcheries, and history. He suggests, as do the native people seeking to address those threats, that there is a 6th H, hubris. This is the Ice Harbor Dam, one of 4 such dams on the lower Snake River. The science has clearly implicated all 4 of these dams as bearing responsibility for the precipitous decline of salmon here and farther upriver. All 4 populations of salmon and steelhead here are at risk of extinction. And the major tribes that live both here in the Snake River Basin and the larger Columbia River Basin say that is putting at risk what they call their lifeways, their culture, their diet, and their religion. So this is a very important topic that is central to the identity of the entire Pacific Northwest and certainly to the tribal nations that are here in the Pacific Northwest. And we're very fortunate to have with us Shannon Wheeler, who is the tribal chair for the Nez Perce. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us on this program today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share our story once again with you, and it just feels good to be here.
Well, we've had the opportunity to speak before, and I know that it's very useful for people that are watching this. Some may be familiar with the issues, some that may not. I think one is just the amount of history, the sense of connection to the land and the water. And I think that those of us that are not indigenous, that are not native to this land, may be able to trace our heritage back 100-200 years, 5-6 generations. It's a very different matter for the Nez Perce and the other tribes in this area. Could you sort of give us a sense of how far back that connection goes and what the nature of that connection is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I appreciate that question because a lot of times, we associate ourselves just to our family lineage, which is very important, but also within tribal nations, we associate our lineage to the land and to the water and to, what we are a part of. We're not separate from that. So I think that's kind of unique for our tribes. I think, if we look around the world, we should all kind of tie ourselves to the land. And I think that's where we've been. And as far as, any type of record, archaeological records, it's at least 16,500 years for us.
Most of us are only seeing what we're seeing now, or perhaps a couple decades in the past. What observations, what stories were passed on to you and perhaps family or friends from prior generations, grandparents or their parents, looking back at what they saw and what they experienced in this region, both relating to salmon, which is going to be a major part of our talk, but the relationship with the land and the nature of the land overall?
I think just the interaction that we are able to have and the stories that come from, your parents or grandparents of their interaction, whether it was on a hill slope or traveling to a fishing site, or you're at a hunting camp, or you could be just at your favorite swimming hole, and those type of stories and that interaction was truly important to those stories being carried on, and I think those are the types of stories that have always been within our communities, within our tribal nation, that was carried on for purpose of just conversation. And a lot of times there was specific teachings that if you were good at something and you wanted to pursue a skill, that was made available to you. And I think those conversations are deeper conversations, which is definitely something that is within the conversations that we've had to get us to where we're at today, to that understanding, still the deep understanding of our relationship to the land.
Any particular teachings or experiences that were very influential for you personally?
Honestly, just being in the water for me, being around fishing growing up, and traveling to the different places, great distances when you're a 5-year-old kid, to be in a vehicle for 5 or 6 or 7 hours to go fishing, and then landing finally, and getting to a place where the water was too swift for you to even get near it, and having to stay at camp, just that type of teaching is that the parents are protecting you, and if you're able and you're old enough and strong enough to be able to go out and challenge that, but you also have to respect that, because of things can happen when you're out in the mountains, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet up, and a long ways from any hospital. You have to be careful, and you have to be aware of your surroundings. And I think those types of things of identifying the different plants that are out there, the different animals. I think those things are all part of growing up, and you earn that respect, and the things that a lot of them do, the different, it could be understanding how a deer trail works, or understanding how the migration of fish, and how they defend themselves in the water. And so you learn different things, and of course you understand that, and try to grow from that. But those are life lessons that are hands-on, and you're able to take that in and have a really deep appreciation for that, versus reading it on a document, which sometimes some people can relate to that really good, but other times, if you're hands-on and you're out there in the mix, hands in the dirt, feet in the water, I think you're getting a little bit more there.
In the major communities, say in Western Washington or so forth, their experience with salmon is what they see wrapped up at the local supermarket, and that, I would think, generates a very different mindset and ability to really understand some of the issues that we're facing right now. How do you think that plays a role?
I think there's, if you're only going to the market for your salmon or your sustenance, and that does create a bit of a barrier for you to a deeper understanding of the relationship to the land. But there's also an understanding that within family, a lot of times there's prayer, and you're praying, having a prayer before your meal, and I think that's thanking the Creator for what was prepared for you on that day, and how you consume that, and how it nourishes you. I think you will start catching a small understanding of that. And then when you interact a little bit with the land a little more, I think you get a deeper understanding of that. It could be, a bird in your yard, or a squirrel running across a telephone pole line, or whatever it is. And I think eventually you will come to understand that there's more to it than just a product wrapped in some plastic.
Is it accurate to say that the importance of salmon really isn't just as a food source to your people, to the other tribal nations that are involved in this issue, but it goes well beyond diet to culture and perhaps even spirituality, religion?
Yeah, exactly. That's, as I mentioned, trying to actually catch a fish, and it's being able to defend itself and place itself in places that it's difficult to see it. Sometimes you can think you're looking in the clearest river that there is, and you just see rocks, but there's actually
Yeah.
there's actually fish in there, and so they're able to defend themselves in a manner which I think is important to be able to understand that as a fisherman. But it's also learning from their actions, what they've done in their life, and understanding their distances that they travel, and the swift water that they're in. I think there's a lot to learn from that.
And it leads also, it would seem, to a different understanding that there aren't humans up here and the rest of creation, salmon and other wildlife down here, but in fact, it's part of a whole.
That is understanding that we have. We see ourselves equal to, and we don't place ourselves above our foods and the land and the water, and it's who we are. It's what we're made up of, and if we were to look at our reflection in the water, I don't believe that we would see, your face and your hair. You would actually see, the hillsides on the other side, the trees, and that's just a reflection of you being in that, being within that realm of nature, and it's like, oh, I'm a part of this. I'm not aside from this. It's, I mean, for someone that was just, say, from the inner city, or someone that just spent time in a basketball gym, you're in the gym, and maybe you make the basketball team, and maybe you're sitting on the bench and you're watching the game and watching the team. Maybe you're understanding what they're doing out there, and then the coach puts you in. You still can't just watch the game. You're actually a part of the game. And it's the same thing with us as human beings. We're interacting with the land, and we're actually a part of what's going on. And so what we do affect that. And so just like on a basketball court, if you're doing the necessary things that you have to do in order to score a goal, then you have an understanding of how you should be acting or reacting out there on the basketball court. You can take that into life and say, okay, what I'm doing here is I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the landscape, and once I go out into the landscape, and actually having impact on it. And if I'm impacting in a negative manner, then I have to understand that what I've done has had a negative effect on all that's around me.
Part of the understanding in the larger sense stems from the fact that the Nez Perce have been very much involved in terms of research, either original research or participating in research on salmon, what sustains salmon and what is damaging them. Can you sort of summarize for us some of the research that your tribal nation has been involved in and what you found with that?
Yeah, there's extensive research that we've done. Just a few of the highlights. Of course, one of the main things that we've done recently was understanding the quasi-extinction threshold of native spawners returning to their headwaters. And we've, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, there was a 4-year period there where 44% of the populations were at that threshold. So 50 or fewer spawners returned for 4 consecutive years. Now last year, a couple of those had a few over 50, but still teetering around that level. And so this year we'll see, hopefully things get a little better this year. Fish are cyclical, and so hopefully the runs come up. But we've also been in a spill regime that's been favorable to the outmigration of the juvenile smolts. So we'll see what that is and what happens there. But some of our climate team have done studies on ridges that have open fields, and so the runoff on those generally, if there was trees still on top of those in those areas that have been cleared out, back in the early 1900s and converted to farmland, those ridges probably would hold the snow pack a little better, and the runoff wouldn't be rushing down a hillside and bringing sediment with it that is sometimes bad for the habitat. So we're starting to recognize and see things like that, and understanding that we operate from ridgetop to ridgetop, which is another thing that we as a tribe do within our studies, is we look from ridgetop to ridgetop when we look at the water system.
Not simply the river stream itself. I think some people get the sense that, okay, this problem in salmon has developed here in the Pacific Northwest. It's unique. Some are just learning about it, but in fact, we've seen this pattern repeated in Northern Europe, along the Atlantic coast, etc. Do you think it's instructive to look at the same patterns and how they've been repeated in those areas in this area?
Yeah, I think that's important because, of course, history tends to repeat itself, and if we haven't learned from those areas, then we should learn from those areas. And I think what's important here is that we shouldn't just turn a blind eye to that.
Salmon are not only of worth because of the centrality of them to diet and culture and faith, but also they're an indicator species of the overall health of an ecosystem then, aren't they?
Exactly. They're what happens to them happens to the rest of the system, and they're a big part of carrying nutrients from the ocean and back to the ocean. And I think being able to have that diversity in themselves, and to be able to transfer from fresh to salt water, and then from the ocean depths to 6,000 feet. That's a big difference. Not a lot of creatures can actually do that, and they're able to do that. So it shows the strength of them, but it also, we look at the building blocks of nature, and several different indicator species across the globe, as they're being affected, they have these ripple effects on the land itself. I mean, look at the bison, and look at the plains, and look what's happened there with the grasses that were normally there. It's just changed the whole ecosystem, and it's not always for the better. It could be initially that some things people have benefited from it, but does that replace 100 million bison and the effects that those have? Those have had positive effects on the land itself, of why you're able to grow such good crops in those areas. And in the land in the Pacific Northwest, where they're teeming with millions of salmon and nutrients that have been distributed over the landscape for millions of years, that has had an effect in the process of the making of what we know the world today.
Treaty obligations, these are definite obligations. It is observing the law. Could you maybe, for our viewers and listeners, expand on that a little bit, that this is not just an informal agreement, but it was the force of law in exchange for lands?
Yeah, that's a good, observation of a treaty, right? For the surface of it. And as we look at treaty and our interaction with the United States of America, from sovereign to sovereign, we talk about Lewis and Clark in 1805, we talk about Governor Stevens in 1855, but we talk about also what was brought to that 1855 treaty that was negotiated at arm's length, and when we look at it under specifically Article 3, which secures a way of life for us, and allows us to fish, hunt, gather at all of these usual and accustomed places, well, it comes with that our obligation to the salmon, our obligation to the land, to the water. So it comes a way of life. And so when we bring that way of life forward and we place that on the table for negotiation, the United States looked at it, and yeah, in perpetuity, you can retain those things. You can always have that. And so as we bargained for that, the U.S. bargained and agreed to it as well. And so if the U.S. agreed to that, which they did, and ratified it in 1859 by the Senate, and it was proclaimed by the President, I believe, in April of 1859, then that went to the Constitution of the United States. And under the rule of law, administrations, congressional leaders, law enforcement, courts are all bound by, are subject to the rule of law, as you speak to. And so that's where that way of life sits, because we give up several million acres, 13.2 million acres as a good estimate of what we've given up for this bargain and for this way of life. And, the things that we granted the United States, we basically granted an easement to utilize our river systems and waterways in common with the people of the United States. I mean, so we actually had rights that were already in existence. And so that's, a lot of people don't understand that they feel that the United States granted us these rights. They weren't granted rights, they were reserved rights.
Right.
And so when we look at the rule of law and the understanding that the Constitution and Article 6, Clause 2, where the treaties sit, that the congressional leaders, senators, state representatives are subject to that under their oath or affirmation that this is your obligation to that. And so the treaty holds to that rule of law as it sits in the Constitution. And we're all obligated to that as United States citizens to uphold that. And so when we talk about the Columbia River System of Operations, the Lower Snake River dams, those were authorized, but did they preempt a treaty? And so our treaty and our law and our understanding of what that actually means then is up to our interpretation. And so our interpretation is, once again, we granted an easement for a right to, in perpetuity, to always have fish in our waters, to be able to go fish, not just to dip a pole in the water and say you're fishing, but to actually retrieve and consume, trade, and utilize.
And when you don't have that level of fish available to you, those treaty rights don't tend to mean very much, which is, from what I understand, part of the reason that there had been, for a very long time, a couple of decades, I believe, some legal action undertaken to get the United States government to, again, restore some of those aspects. Number one, is that an accurate understanding? And tell me a little bit about how that has culminated in a new agreement, or at least an agreement to break off those legal actions in just the last week or two.
I think, over the course of time, erosion of this mutual agreement has been tested. And so there's been some erosion of this treaty bridge that we once had from the United States to the Nez Perce. There was a bridge that we could both cross, and we were able to enjoy that. But some places along the line that was challenged, the bridge kind of crumbled away a bit and crumbled away a little more over the years. And then we get into places where, we look at the Harbors Act and, when the dams were built, and it's like, where's that consultation at with the tribes that these things were going to come in and they were going to decimate your fish runs, which happened to be sitting in Article 3 of the treaty that's sitting in the Constitution of the United States. And where is that consultation at? Where is the conversation that should be happening as it did in 55 and 59 and our 58, 59, 61, 63, and 68? Where's that conversation that happened? Where's that mutual bridge at once again? And why isn't that happening with us? And how did all this other stuff happen without our consultation on development of this system that is going to decimate the fish, then decimated the fish, and now we're in a place to where we're trying to recover what's left and say, hey, what you've done over there has burdened us. You've not only transferred wealth out of the river into an agriculture economy, an energy economy, tourism economy, but what you've left us over here with nothing in our bag, or very little in our bag.
So this brings up some very interesting and troubling questions and some real challenges. And I think I am very appreciative of the fact that you agreed to allow this conversation to move forth into some of the events that have transpired more recently. But what we're going to do is that deserves added attention in the form of a separate conversation. So we're going to take a break right now and then come back in next week's episode to discuss these questions further. So thank you very much, Chairman Shannon Wheeler, and thank you all of you for tuning into this episode of Challenge 2.0, and I'd invite you to be sure to tune in to next week's edition to see us pick up our conversation. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this program, found our conversations to be informative, entertaining, and thought-provoking, and the vision inspiring of people from different backgrounds who can disagree without being disagreeable, perhaps you might consider supporting our program with a contribution. Your support will not only help our program continue, it will also support the broader efforts of Paths to Understanding, our supporting parent nonprofit organization.